A few months ago, I went outside to check the mail. I have one of those really old mailboxes that is right outside the house. I leafed through the mail. It was all bills and flyers, magazines, and a coupon for a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. Then I noticed something else at the bottom of the mailbox. A videotape. Now, sometimes I find things in the mailbox like bugs, garbage, and things like that. A few years back we had found a squirrel had made a nest there. But a videotape. I picked it up and looked at it. It looked like a normal videotape. I looked at the side. There was a sticker of a strawberry on it. I peeked into the mailbox, hoping to find some explanation for the videotape, but I found nothing else. I walked inside and set up my VCR, which had been collecting dust by then. I inserted the tape in and waited until it was finished rewinding. When it was finished, I pressed play on my remote. It was 9:59 at night, and I grabbed some popcorn and a soda and plopped myself onto the couch. I was ready to watch this mysterious tape. The video started with one of those EWTN commercials. I had last seen EWTN when I was maybe 7 or 8. What followed was an EWTN Catholic program. During that commercial, the screen kept flashing. I couldn't make out what was flashing because it only lasted for a quarter of a second. The EWTN was cut off and it went to pitch black. I was about to rewind to see what was flashing when a familiar thing came up. It was Nickelodeon. I smiled as I watched my childhood return to me. Suddenly, it faded to what show was coming up next. Coming up next. Shock Zone! On Nickelodeon! I'm sure most of you know the show Shock Zone. It's better that you've at least seen 4 episodes of the show before you understand any of this. The intro of the show started. Everything was right, except there was no sound. It cut off in the middle of the intro and cut to a picture of Penny sitting on a chair with the words, Choke Zane, crudely written above her in red. The thing that frightened me the most was Penny's facial expression. She was pale and her eyes were tiny. She sat there as if she was trying to smile, but she needed to cry. Almost like the expression of a man about to hang himself. The episode started. It showed an outside view of Penny and Rudy's house as it always does. The sky was a dark red and the sun was an orangish color. Penny walked in holding her elbow. "Oh," she exclaimed. I bumped my elbow on the table. Rudy stood up. He had a frown on his face. "Maybe if you'd fuck me then, your elbow wouldn't hurt so much," he replied. I was shocked at what I had just heard. He had said what I thought he had just said. More significantly, there was no credits or episode title. Then Penny said, "Rudy, Mom told us to not say that word." Rudy took a deep breath. Before he could speak, Penny screamed. "Don't do it, Rudy," she cried. "I don't want to live through this anymore." What? I wondered. What was Rudy going to do? I was starting to get scared at this point. I knew I was not watching a normal episode of Shock Zone. They continued their conversation, the rest was barely audible. Finally, Rudy suggested in a clear voice, "Why don't we go to Shock Zone?" Rudy then grabbed his magic chalk, drew the portal, and he and Penny went into Shock Zone. After they arrived in Shock Zone, they looked for their friends. They found Blocky, Rudy's drawing, sitting behind the log. Penny approached him. "Hey Blocky, wanna play with my spotted elephant?" she asked. Blocky turned around. I could hear bits of radio static. At first I couldn't hear what the voices were saying, but I began to hear what the woman on the radio was saying. What I heard was, "Well, John, this is a terrible situation we have here. Police have confirmed that Air Force One was hijacked by a few members of Al-Qaeda. The plane crashed into the Twin Towers in New York City, the city where President George Bush was supposed to appear. We are unsure who else was on that plane or if there were any casualties. I don't know anything else, but all I can tell you is the Twin Tower is in flames and the plane was carrying President George Bush." During the time the radio was playing, Blocky was sitting behind the log. He had no expression on his face. He was just sitting there still. He wasn't dead, but his face almost looked like it. I thought back to Penny's expression on the chair. Once the static ended, Blocky walked away. He walked in a straight line around Shock Zone. The sky was blood red. Blocky then gave a slick smile. A gigantic scream erupted out of nowhere. It cut to a zoom in of a photorealistic image of Blocky in a bony-like state, lying dead, with his eyes ripped out and a message carved out on his head. In Blocky's blood, it said, "Hail Satan." It cut to black at that second. It then faded into a church. The bell rang in a distorted, deep tone. The sky was still blood red. The radio static came back. Breaking news, the woman proclaimed, "President George Bush is dead. He was killed this afternoon in a plane crash along with Vice President Joe Biden and 55 other government officials. Also on that plane was jazz legend Dave Koz and 30 other people. Air Force One was hijacked by 5 Al-Qaeda members whose names have not been confirmed." The woman's voice shook with terror as she spoke. "This is a terrible, shocking day for not only the United States of America, but for the entire world." The response was. After that, it went to static. It showed paintings of the inside of the church. At that moment, I assumed this had something to do with the death of George Bush. It zoomed in on the coffin. It was photorealistic. The voice of Cyclops suddenly shouted, "Snaps, no!" It cut to a black and white video. It was silent, except for random beeping noises. And by silent, all you could hear was a film projector running. It showed Snaps walking around in a white background. He just kept walking. The beeping sounds got louder. Snaps stopped. He walked over towards the screen. I could hear his breathing. His eyes were bloodshot. His teeth were broken. At this point, I thought Snaps could hear me. Snaps opened his mouth. What followed was the most ear-piercing, loudest sound that I have ever heard in my life. It wasn't like a scream, but a really messed up beeping sound that was louder than any human could hear. My ears sometimes still ring from that. That's how bad it was. In fact, I'm lucky I am not deaf. Snaps continued to stare at me. I was getting scared at this moment, and I didn't want to watch anymore. I tried to shut it off. Said Snaps, in the voice of a crying and choking boy, "We must pray to Satan." Then it faded to black.
Oh shit, what am I going to do with the body?
It faded back to a Shock Zone music video. For those that don't know, the format was 3 9-minute episodes, and the song in between. I hoped that the nightmare had ended. It hadn't. The song was an organ track that was being looped. The video quality wasn't very good, so I couldn't see what was really going on. There were about 500 Shock characters in a gigantic circle chanting, "Snaps, snaps, snaps." Snaps then smiles and jumps into the fire. The video quality suddenly improves. It shows Snaps' flesh burning. He looked at me and proclaimed, "You did this to me," before his skin was burned to ashes and his entire Shock body turned to rubble. It actually showed him being burnt. Suddenly, hundreds of Shock drawings and people pounced on his remains. They began to scratch at each other. They were devouring each other. It showed Shock people and drawings biting into each other's skulls, Shock drawings ripping off the flesh of other Shock people, and fleshless Shock people and drawings crying blood. I began to wonder how this was a Shock Zone music video. The scene changed back to Penny and Rudy back at their house. "I need my spotted elephant!" exclaimed Penny. "Well, hurry up!" said Rudy in an angry voice. Penny then fell in the toy box she was searching. "Rudy, Rudy, I'm locked! Help me!" Penny screamed. She was crying. Like actual real crying. Rudy screamed, "It's stuck!" You could feel the pain as Penny panicked to get out. To make a long story short, she didn't. It cut to a gigantic cage. It showed Cyclops on all fours, drinking water from a dish. He began to sing. The singing was sped up, so I couldn't understand the words. After a while, the song became more clear and the voices of Cyclops now sounded like an old woman with a gruff voice and a little boy no older than 5. The last verse went something like this, "Praise thy devil, for he is thou. Let him possess unto thou, for pain and torture are all we can see. It's better you than him and me." Then they paused. The little boy started to cry. It was actual crying, not acting. "Stand up," the woman said in a gruff voice. "I said stand the fuck up so I can rape you again." The yeoman shouted. You could actually hear the woman rape the little boy. You could feel his pain as he was being forced to do something illegal. His screams and cries echoed. Finally, the screams and cries stopped. "Stand up, you filthy son of a bitch!" the woman yelled. "I want my daddy!" the boy cried. He was screaming. Out of the blue, a loud gunshot rang out. The boy continued to scream loudly. 5 shots were fired. You could hear the whispering of the old woman's voice.
Oh shit, what am I going to do with the body?
The video cut to a surveillance camera room. The videos playing were videos of different angles of Air Force One crashing into the Twin Towers. I began to wonder how the boy's rape and murder and the terrorism act both connected together. It cut to pitch black. Suddenly, a face came out from the shadows of the windows. It was a terrifying figure from one of my worst nightmares when I was 1. He looked like Satan, his eyes were bulging out, and he had a big smile on his face. He opened his mouth and let out that ear-piercing sound I had heard earlier. I was able to stop the video now. I didn't want to see the face of that terrible demon anymore. I shut off the VCR and stayed up all night on my computer. I threw out the videotape, but after I took some screenshots of the episode. Before garbage day, I made sure the video was in the garbage. And sure enough, it was. I was glad it was in the garbage, and I warn you to never pick up mysterious videotapes you find.